Welcome, my curious companions. This is SleepyWhys, a quiet corner of the internet where the day gently unwinds and ordinary wonders reveal their calmer side. I know you've been carrying the day with you. The thoughts, the conversations, the unfinished lists. You can set them down here and let the night move around you like a slow tide. There is a particular kind of stillness that arrives only after everything else has stopped. The door is closed. The lights are low. Somewhere nearby, perhaps, a warm cup rests on a surface, faint steam rising from it in soft and unhurried curls. The weight of the day has finally, gently, begun to release. From the shoulders, from the jaw, from the small muscles around the eyes that spend so many hours doing so much quiet, unnoticed work. And into that stillness, almost without invitation, the day begins to drift back, not urgently, not all at once, but in small, unhurried pieces. A face that passed briefly in the afternoon. The particular way a door closed somewhere behind you. A sentence left half-finished in a conversation that has long since ended. These fragments return the way loose pages might drift down from a shelf, landing softly, without order, without insistence. There's something familiar about this. The way the mind doesn't present the day back as a clean, continuous story. It offers pieces, impressions, the texture of an afternoon rather than its sequence. Most people, settling into stillness at the end of a long day, find the same quiet parade of fragments returning. Not just you, not just tonight. There is something quietly remarkable about this. About the way the brain, in these early moments of rest, begins a process it has always known. Something ancient and unhurried. Each experience from the day, every exchange and glance and moment of warmth or effort was first captured as a fragile electrical pattern, a brief and delicate arrangement of signals moving through soft tissue. Nothing fixed yet, nothing permanent. The mind, in its first pass at experience, holds things loosely, the way you might cup water in your palms, aware that it will shift, that its shape is always temporary. Curiously, the moment the eyes close and outer tasks fall away, a particular network of brain regions grows quietly more active, not less. As though the brain reserves a certain quality of attention for the inner life, and has simply been waiting all day for the world to grow still enough to use it. This has always been happening. Long before it was understood or named, and so, at the center of this quiet unfolding, sits a small, curved structure tucked deep within the brain. Patient and methodical, like a librarian working late after the building has emptied. It gathers the fragments of the day, not to judge them, not yet to decide which ones will stay and which will slowly dissolve, simply to hold them, to arrange them loosely on temporary shelves while the rest of the body begins its long, slow preparation for the night ahead. In brief, almost imperceptible electrical pulses, each one lasting less than a single breath. It replays these fragments in compressed form, quietly confirming that each impression has been received. Memories in these early hours are not yet fully formed. They exist as impressions, more like the faint indentation a hand leaves in warm bread dough than like words written cleanly on a page. Malleable, sensitive to what comes next. The brain has not yet decided what to keep in sharp relief and what to let soften at the edges, the way old photographs slowly lose their contrast over time. And so the day sits, loosely arranged, not quite past and not quite stored, suspended in that gentle in-between space that belongs only to the early hours of sleep. There is something deeply restful in this once it is felt rather than thought about. The mind is not replaying the day because something went wrong. It is simply doing what it has always done, what every mind does in the quiet after the world goes still. Moving through the hours just past the way a hand might move slowly across a table in the dark, feeling the surface, making sense of what is there. Beneath the soft weight of a blanket, the body grows warmer. The cup on the nearby surface has cooled just slightly. The fragments of the afternoon continue to drift, without urgency now, without the need to land anywhere in particular. The day is finding its shelves, and there is nothing required of you, only to rest here softly while it does. Somewhere in the deep quiet that follows the last waking thought, something begins. Not with any sound or signal that could be felt from the outside, not with any urgency, but beneath the stillness of a resting body, beneath the slow rise and fall of the chest, beneath the warmth gathered under soft blankets, the brain quietly shifts into a different kind of work, a different kind of attention. One that belongs entirely to the night, one that has always belonged to the night in every person who has ever closed their eyes and let the day go. It is the beginning of an archival process. Patient, methodical, unfolding across hours the way a tide moves across a shore, not in a single sweep, but in long, slow rhythms, advancing and retreating, each pass rearranging the surface just slightly. The brain, in its deep rest, does not simply power down. It enters into a kind of conversation with itself. A slow, murmured exchange between regions that spent the day performing very different roles. The hippocampus, that quiet collector of the day's impressions, the same librarian from the early moments of settling, begins to speak in gentle electrical pulses to the broader, older landscape of the neocortex. The vast, folded terrain where knowledge accumulated across years resides in its deeper, more settled form. And quietly, at the threshold between the outer world and this inner conversation, a small relay station deep within the brain draws its gates gently closed. The thalamus grows still. The room may shift. A door may close somewhere distantly, and yet the sleeping brain, insulated now from the surface of things, continues its own unhurried work undisturbed. There's something familiar about the feeling of this. The sense, sometimes noticed upon waking, that something has been quietly resolved, that a thought which felt tangled in the evening has somehow, overnight, found a place to rest. It is a feeling most people have known without ever quite naming it. What seems to be happening beneath the surface are slow waves, long, rolling rhythms of electrical activity passing through the sleeping brain like swells moving through deep water. And within those slower waves, briefer flickers arise and fade, moving through the brain like small eddies on an otherwise calm surface. Brief, repetitive, barely perceptible from the outside. What is perhaps less immediately obvious is how precisely these rhythms are coordinated. The slow waves, the spindles, and the brief hippocampal replays arriving in a particular sequence, one nested inside the other, like movements within a longer, quieter piece of music. The experiences of the day, those fragile impressions gathered through the afternoon hours, the loose pages that drifted back in the early moments of rest, are revisited here, not replayed in full. More like echoes, compressed and softened, passing again through pathways that first encountered them in the waking hours. A conversation from earlier might move through the brain again, not as a complete scene, but as a feeling, a tone, a residue of meaning without all its original detail. This process feels less like storage and more like weaving. The fragments of today are drawn gently into contact with older, more established knowledge, threads of memory laid down across months, across years, and slowly, without decision or intention, they begin to connect, to belong somewhere. Nothing needs to be understood quickly here. Sleep is not a pause between the meaningful moments. It is itself a meaningful moment, invisible and interior, unfolding in the same unhurried way for every person who has ever surrendered the day and grown still. Some experiences through this long, quiet process are strengthened. Others are allowed to soften at the edges, their detail fading like pencil marks left too long in open light, not lost, simply allowed to recede, making space for what the mind has decided in its wordless way to hold more closely. There is a patience in this that the waking mind rarely permits itself. Beneath the soft weight of the night, the archivists continue their slow, careful work. Unhurried, asking nothing of the body that holds them, only stillness, only time. Not every moment is kept with equal care. This is something the body seems to understand long before the mind finds words for it. Somewhere in the quiet accumulation of a life, certain moments have stayed, vivid, textured, strangely complete, while entire weeks have dissolved without leaving so much as a watermark behind. A particular afternoon from years ago, the exact quality of light in a room where something unexpected happened, the warmth of a hand held briefly during a difficult season. These things remain, and yet whole stretches of ordinary Tuesday mornings, hundreds of them perhaps, have passed without leaving the faintest trace. There's something familiar about this uneven landscape of remembering. It belongs to everyone in one form or another. There is a reason for this, and it lives not in the mind alone, but in the body. In the quiet chemistry that moves beneath thought, beneath language, beneath anything that could be called a decision. Tucked deep within the brain, close to the same patient hippocampus that spent the earlier hours quietly sorting the day's impressions, sits a small structure that attends not to what happened, but to how much it seemed to matter. It responds to significance the way a compass responds to a magnetic field. Not with sound or movement that can be felt, but with a subtle internal shift. When a moment carries emotional weight, when something unexpected arrives, or something long hoped for finally does, or something frightening passes by, this region sends out its own quiet signal. And in response, chemical messengers are released into the spaces between neurons, moving through the brain like ink dropped into still water. They do not add detail to the memory. They do something subtler. They deepen the impression, strengthening the connections between neurons that fired together in that moment, making those particular pathways just slightly more durable, more easily returned to, more resistant to the gentle erosion that takes so many ordinary moments quietly over time. What is perhaps less immediately apparent is what happens later, during the dreaming hours of the night. Emotional memories seem to be revisited then, quietly replayed, but in a brain chemistry subtly different from the one that first encoded them. Certain signals that were present during the original experience grow quieter during this stage of sleep, as though the mind finds a way to return to a difficult moment while gently loosening its sharper edges. The memory is preserved, but something of its original weight may soften imperceptibly across the long hours of the night. This happens without effort, without intention. In every sleeping person, in every quiet room, across every ordinary night. The moments that glow most vividly tend to be the ones that carried some emotional signature. Unexpected laughter at the edge of an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. A moment of real fear, and then the slow release of relief when it passed. The particular stillness of a first feeling of belonging somewhere or with someone. Every vivid memory carries within it a small ghost of the emotion that originally marked it. Not always felt upon remembering, but somehow present in the texture of the recollection. The way warmth remains in a soft blanket long after the room has cooled. And what of the moments that fade? The long, soft sequences of ordinary life, the routines folded quietly into one another, the countless cups of warm tea and unhurried evenings that passed without ceremony. These are not failures of memory. There is something restful in allowing the unremarkable to soften, to blur at the edges, to become part of a gentle background rather than a precise record. Something everyone's mind does quietly and without announcement, simply as part of being alive. Beneath warm blankets now, the breath slowing, the thoughts beginning to lose their edges. Somewhere in the soft darkness of a resting brain, this quiet partnership between emotion and memory continues its unhurried work. Nothing needs to be understood quickly. Some things simply remain, and they remain because once they were felt. There is a memory somewhere, perhaps from childhood, perhaps from not so long ago, that has been returned to many times. A particular afternoon, a conversation, a moment that seemed at the time to mean one thing and has, over the years, quietly begun to mean something else. Most people carry at least one memory like this. Worn smooth from returning, changed almost imperceptibly each time. This is not a failure of remembering. It is something far more interesting than that. Every time a memory is retrieved, every time the mind reaches back and draws a past moment into the present, something subtle and largely invisible occurs. The neural pathways that hold that memory, the delicate web of connections that has encoded the faces, the feelings, the textures of a particular moment in time, briefly return to a kind of softness. A state they haven't occupied since the memory was first being formed. For a short window, those connections become malleable again, open in the quietest possible way to something new. What is perhaps less immediately obvious is that this window does not open every time equally. A memory seems to become most flexible when something about it slightly mismatches what the mind expected to find. When a small detail arrives differently than anticipated, or a feeling surfaces that wasn't quite there before. Without that gentle friction, some memories may simply be retrieved and returned intact, undisturbed. It is the unexpected that loosens the thread, however slightly, allowing something new to slip quietly into the weave. The act of remembering, which feels like retrieval, like reaching into a drawer and finding something exactly where it was left, is in fact a gentle act of reconstruction. The memory is not simply read back, it is rebuilt each time from the materials currently available. And those materials include not just the original experience, but everything that has been learned, felt, and understood in the time since. And the brain, it seems, does not stop there. When recalling a scene, a room, a path, a particular setting where something once occurred, the mind quietly fills in the space just beyond the edges of what was actually experienced. Details that were never truly seen are gently completed, extended, drawn in from context and familiarity. The past, as it exists inside the mind, is always slightly larger than the moment that gave rise to it. Always slightly warmer, perhaps, always shaped by the hands that have held it since. A childhood afternoon remembered now carries within it something the child who lived it could not have contributed. A layer of understanding, of distance, of accumulated feeling. The memory returns through a mind that has since grown, that has since experienced loss and warmth and change, and so it arrives slightly different than it left. Words once heard as careless might soften over time into something more like uncertainty. A moment once felt as loss might gradually reveal itself, from the longer vantage point of years, to have been something closer to a beginning. There's something familiar about this slow, quiet shift. Something everyone has sensed, even without naming it. The brain seems designed for exactly this kind of slow revision. Not to distort, not to deceive, but to keep the past connected, woven into the continuously changing fabric of present understanding. A memory sealed permanently at the moment of its formation would belong to a version of the self that no longer exists. The mind, in its patient way, quietly prevents this, keeping the past alive by allowing it gently to move. The inner life is less like a library of fixed records and more like something that breathes, that shifts with the light, that changes texture across seasons. A living story, told and gently retold, each version true to the person doing the remembering at that particular moment in time. the small revision happening somewhere in the resting brain tonight will not be noticed or felt. It will simply occur the way so much of what matters most occurs, slowly, without announcement, in the long and unhurried hours of the night. The past, gently breathing, still becoming what it was. Not everything is meant to stay. There is a kind of grace in this once it is allowed to settle. The understanding that the mind, in its deep and patient wisdom, releases as carefully as it keeps. That forgetting is not a flaw running quietly through the system, but something closer to a gift. A necessary gentleness the brain extends to itself night after night across an entire lifetime. A kindness shared without knowing by every person who has ever slept and woken and found the world still navigable. During the deepest hours of sleep, when the body has grown entirely still and the breath has found its slowest, most unhurried rhythm, something moves through the brain. A slow, quiet current of fluid, almost imperceptible, flowing through the spaces between cells along pathways that open more fully in sleep than they ever do in waking hours. It carries with it the accumulated residue of the day's neural activity, the metabolic traces left behind by hours of thinking, feeling, and remembering, and moves it gently away the way a slow river carries sediment from its bed without disturbing the surface of the water above. What is perhaps quietly remarkable is how the brain's own cells participate in this. Certain supporting cells, ordinarily maintaining their shape through the busy hours of the day, appear to contract slightly during deep sleep, drawing back just enough to widen the spaces between them, allowing the slow fluid current to pass through more freely. The architecture of the brain shifts almost imperceptibly in the dark, opening itself in the gentlest way to its own renewal. It has been doing this, unnoticed, through every night of a life. And alongside this nightly clearing, a slower and longer process continues. Across months, across years, neural pathways that are rarely returned to, memories and associations that go long unvisited, gradually loosen their hold. The connections between neurons that once encoded a particular detail grow slowly quieter, less insistent, until the detail itself softens below the threshold of easy recall. Not erased, simply released back into the background, the way color fades from fabric left too long in open light. It's interesting to notice that this releasing is not entirely passive. The brain appears to actively tend to which connections are maintained and which are allowed to weaken, guided not by conscious decision, but by something quieter, a kind of cellular economy operating far beneath awareness, in which the pathways most recently and most often traveled are gently preserved, while those left long untouched are slowly, gracefully allowed to thin. A forest does not hold every leaf it has ever grown. It releases them in long, slow waves, season after season. And what falls becomes in time the very richness that allows new growth to find its footing. The brain too shapes itself through what it releases, through what it allows without ceremony to drift. And somewhere in the soft interior of a resting mind, the day's loose pages, those fragments that drifted back in the early stillness, are still moving, settling. Some finding their place among older, quieter shelves. Others growing lighter, less defined, dissolving slowly into the background of everything that has ever passed through and been gently let go. The breath slows. The blankets hold their warmth. Somewhere beneath the stillness, a slow current continues its patient passage through the dark. The day still finding where it belongs. The mind still doing what it has always done, quietly, unhurried. In the long, soft hours of the night, if these quiet wanderings have made your evening a little softer, you're always welcome back. Subscribing keeps the lantern lit and helps other weary minds find their way here too. Now let the questions settle. There's nothing left to figure out tonight. Rest easy, and I'll see you in the next quiet Why.